But the topic that we're introducing is somewhat less complicated than his standard topics of Middle East politics, the Holocaust, and most other human rights issues. And while these issues and campaigns are, to the good fortune of many people worldwide, a fundamental component of his life, the video will depict another fundamental component of his 80 years, the family he came from in Europe and the family he has raised in the United States. To us, our grandfather is more than just an accomplished lawyer, statesman, and human rights leader. He is also an extremely caring individual, constantly eager to educate us with his vast knowledge.
Grandpa, this is your answer to the Holocaust.
Ist die goldene Pave geflogen, geflogen, und die Nacht hat geöffnet die goldene Augen. Lichtiger meiner Schlafrein.
When Hitler entered Austria, my grandparents applied for American visas for themselves and for their son, my father. My father, a native of Austria, was granted one. His parents, natives of what was then Poland, were under the national origins quota system that was in effect placed on the waiting list for the Polish quota, which was then oversubscribed. By the time their names reached the top of the list, almost 2 years later, it was no longer possible for them to escape. Not long after my father fled to the United States, the Nazis forced his parents out of Austria. They had been Polish citizens, but their citizenship had been rescinded and they had to be smuggled into Poland. Before leaving their home, my grandmother, who had saved many documents from her son's life, sent a crate filled with pictures and memorabilia to her son in New York. My father followed her example. The images in this video are a result of this diligent record-keeping.
My father-in-law writes, "My father, Pinkas, was born in 1886 in Stanislau. He was the son of Israel and Frimit Schifter. My grandfather was a native of Czernowitz. My mother, Bila Esther Blas, was born in 1893 in the district of Garwolin, near Warsaw. She was the daughter of Joseph and Numa Blas. The Blas family moved to the city of Lublin before World War I. During that war, Paul served as a soldier in the Austro-Hungarian army and was assigned to the occupation force for Lublin. Balbina's father would invite Jewish soldiers of the occupying armies to his home on Jewish holidays. Balbina and Paul met during one such event and fell in love with each other. They were married in a Hasidic ceremony performed by Balbina's father in October 1919.
I was born in Vienna, Austria on July 31st, 1923. Though they were not rich, my parents were reasonably comfortable. My father traveled to the United States to supplement the family income. The Depression reached Austria in 1931. I was conscious of the fact that we were quite poor. As I look back at these formative years, I remember a home in which there was a great deal of warmth and kindness. My second Hebrew tutor, who prepared me for my bar mitzvah, was strongly Zionist and suggested that I read the portion assigned to me for my bar mitzvah service without chanting and using Sephardic pronunciation. As I started, I heard a shocked murmuring. I became increasingly interested in the Zionist idea, focusing on the possibility of emigrating to the Palestinian Mandate.
Friday, March 11, 1938, the German troops crossed into Austria. The German army entered Vienna and Hitler arrived in the city. It did not take our family long to decide on the future. We must try to get to the United States as quickly as possible. On October 27, 1938, we got our first real scare. It was my parents' 19th wedding anniversary. They had gone out for the evening. I had remained at home alone. Around 9:30, the bell rang. I went to the door and asked who was there. The answer was, "Police, open up." I opened up, and there stood a burly man in civilian clothes. In his hand, he held a sheaf of slips. From 2 of these slips, he read off the names of my father and mother and asked for them. I said they were out for the evening. He told me gruffly to tell them to come to the police station as soon as they returned home. Later that evening, my parents came home. I told them of the visit from the police. They just looked at each other and then said they would go. My parents did not return home that evening. I remember lying awake all night. I also remember that my teeth chattered all night, the only time in my life that I had that experience.
I vividly recall waiting in line for a document at the headquarters of the Gestapo. While I was standing there, I felt that my left shoulder had been hit hard. I turned to see who had hit me and saw a man in the black SS uniform standing to my left rear. He just stared ahead, not looking at me and not saying anything to me. I moved back and the SS man stepped through the line in which I was standing and walked off. With his behavior, he sent the message that, as far as he was concerned, I was not a human being to whom one would talk or with whom one would make eye contact. By November, all my papers were in order. Arrangements were now made for me to travel to the United States, first by train from Vienna to Rotterdam and then by boat from Rotterdam to New York. It was an unusual December day for Vienna. The sky was blue, the sun was shining, and it was unseasonably warm. As I got up that morning, I felt the excitement of knowing that this was the day on which I was going to leave for the United States. I also looked forward to the experience of going out into the world on my own, without supervision. We arrived at the train station in ample time, and as we waited, my parents stood on the platform. I lowered the window in my compartment and talked to them. My father made a point on that day of speaking to me in English. My mother was very quiet. She held a handkerchief and daubed her eyes from time to time. Finally, the whistle blew and the train started to roll. My parents used their handkerchiefs to wave to me as the train rolled out of the station. I waved back and kept looking back at them as their image became smaller and smaller. Then the train came to a bend and they disappeared from my view. That was the last time I saw them.
On December 15, 1938, Richard arrived in New York. Richard lived with relatives in the Bronx, where he attended DeWitt Clinton High School and earned pocket money as a delivery boy. He then attended the College of the City of New York and graduated after 3 years in 1943, summa cum laude.
This letter was written by my father to his father on September 20th, 1940. If it were possible for you to travel to Santo Domingo, you could also come directly here. Since I wasn't able to get any information orally when I was in Washington, I wrote to the State Department and asked if you can get a visa without going to Bucharest. I am now waiting for an answer. If the worst really happens and it's not possible to come here before the end of the war, then you will have worked hard enough and long enough for me so that it will be time for me to pay you back, though I could never really repay you for all the good you've given me. Then I will go out to earn money, and you and dear Mutti can go walking. Imagine that that's the worst that could happen. In the meantime, I am working to bring you here, and if we only want it, we shall find a way. Best wishes and kisses, your Richard. From your letter, I see everything that you are doing for your papa. But still you are a young child, and as young as you are, I have given you such big responsibilities. Yes, my beloved son, I have given you a very big assignment. You are still too young to be arranging such things as you are now arranging for your parents. Believe me, my precious son, it hurts me a lot to have to fill your head with Mutti's and my matters and arrangements. But please don't take the matter so seriously. You should first look after yourself. You should be dressed nicely and elegantly, and you should have everything you need. Perhaps, dear Mutti, you are interested in how I spend my time. On weekdays I get up at 7 o'clock, get ready, and take the subway to school. I am there each day at 8:30. I first read the newspaper and then go to my classes or lectures. I spend my free time in the library to prepare for future lectures and exams. I also eat lunch at school, 2 sandwiches and fruit. At 4:30, I leave school and go directly to work. I'm at work at 5 o'clock and stay there until 8. At 8, I go home and have my main meal. In the evening, I read the evening paper or study a little. Yesterday was Mother's Day, and I haven't seen you, my dear Mutti, for 2.5 years.
what I wouldn't give to be together with you and Papa again. Dear child, you write that you haven't received any mail from me for 14 days. I write you very often. I don't understand why you get mail so rarely. My child, I heard that Mrs. Spielberg bought some clothes and shoes for you. I am happy that you have what you need. Dear Ritchie, I got a card from Papa. He is doing well. I hope that we will soon be together. Then you will know that at least your parents are together. So I greet and kiss you, your loving Mutti. The last letter was sent from Lublin on October 29, 1941, from both of his parents, that the Red Cross sent on January 14, 1943. The message came from Majdanek Tatarsky. My dear child, please write us what you are doing. We are healthy. Kissing you, your parents.
Richard joined the Army and became part of a military intelligence unit.
I met my future husband after the war in Berlin. In the division that I worked was a captain in the U.S. Army who had originally come from Germany. He wanted to organize a youth group. He asked me to provide the youth, and he would provide the speakers. So I collected enough people to form a sizable group. This gentleman tapped Richard to be the speaker and to talk about the U.S. government. Richard said fine, but he wanted somebody to help him translate the Bill of Rights from English into German. And that fell on me.
Upon their arrival in the United States, Lilo and Richard moved to New Haven, Connecticut, where Richard attended Yale Law School. After graduation, we moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and I joined the law firm of Riegelman, Strasser, Schwartz, and Spiegelberg. While my practice at the firm was varied, much of my time was devoted to the representation of 4 Indian tribes. My 3 opportunities to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court were certainly the highlights of my career as a lawyer.
I first met Richard Schifter in the mid-1950s, actually shortly after he came to Washington. You know, I learned then and before then and since then that Richard Schifter does not give up easily. Indeed, I can say he's one of the best lawyers I know because he's relentless in his effort to achieve his objective. He got active in Maryland politics. He got active in the Maryland Board of Education. And Richard created JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs.
In 1981, Richard received a telephone call from his friend Jean Kirkpatrick, who had just been appointed U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Her question was, "Dick, can you be in Geneva next Tuesday?" His answer was yes. He started as U.S. representative to the United Nations Human Rights Commission in Geneva, and later became deputy U.S. representative to the Security Council in New York.
As soon as he was representing us in the Human Rights Commission, my colleagues in the Reagan administration could see how skillful he was in the politics of the UN system. I think we fought a good fight. And Dick Schifter was a very important soldier in that struggle.
He decided to retire from his firm in 1985 when Secretary George Shultz asked him to serve as Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights. He held that position until early 1992. The following year, he was named Assistant to the President and Counselor on the staff of the National Security Council, and later served as Special Advisor to the Secretary of State.
He told Yitzhak Rabin he met Russian immigrants in Tel Aviv, and he told Rabin that he cried when he met those immigrants. I think that for Rabin it was a real discovery, because he didn't know that Dick Schifter can cry, because for him Dick Schifter was the real cop, the real policeman of the American administration.
We know what is democracy with human face. It's with your face. As a dentist, that's how we called you. You're taking one after another. One refusnik after another. One prisoner of conscience after another from the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union is crying, screaming from the pain.
My grandfather writes, "Perhaps the most poignant moment of my life came when I walked into the hall in the Palace of Nations in Geneva, where the United Nations Human Rights Commission was holding a meeting. As I took a seat behind the nameplate United States of America, I thought back to a conversation I had had with my father 50 years earlier. I had made up my mind that when I grew up I would become a diplomat. In fact, as we would walk past the Consular Academy, located just a few blocks from where we lived, I would announce to my parents that someday I would go to school there. I became so insistent about becoming a diplomat that my father finally decided to take me aside for a serious conversation. 'We are Jews,' he reminded me. 'Jews cannot get jobs as diplomats.' I was crushed. This conversation, the sad and resigned observation of my father, flooded back into my consciousness as I sat in that hall in Geneva. My spine tingled as I looked at the nameplate in front of me. It showed that this one-time refugee kid, who had arrived in the United States all alone, was here to represent the United States of America. As I sat there, I wished so very much that my parents could have been there to see their son, the diplomat, representing the United States of America."
I think his eyes should actually reflect more than anything else his character, his Jewish wisdom, his love for Israel, and his love for human beings.
He could be a proud Jew and pursue Jewish issues while fighting for human rights around the world, including in the Middle East, and the way in which he reconciled it was quite magnificent.
He's a man who has served the world and served the human race in so beautiful a way. But more than anything else, whenever I think of Dick Schifter, I think of his family.
Hi, Grandpa. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday and tell you how proud I am of you, not only for the accomplishments that everyone else has recognized, but also for the wonderful family that you've raised.
God bless you, dear friend, for many years to come.
Happy birthday, Grandpa. We're really proud of you.
הלוואי ויפתחו שוב שערי גן עדן, הלוואי ויתרסנו מזרח ומערב, הלוואי ונחדש ימינו כאן כקדם.